Hello everyone. How are you? Are you all doing well? It's nice to be back. I was a little bit busy yesterday. I was busy watching a lot of very cool sporting things. Hmm. My I think why is my seems like my bit rate is a lot lower than it usually is. But hello Haru. Hello. I wonder what the issue is there. Well, whatever. It doesn't matter. I think it should look okay. It might be that perhaps I've been maybe just a bad time and there's a lot of people watching. But I'm pretty good. I'm pretty happy after yesterday. Ireland beat the South Africans in a very good game of rugby. Very enjoyable. It wasn't enjoyable for the heart. It definitely it definitely made me panic. Hang on, I knew something felt off, and it was because I didn't have my mic arm pulled closer to me, and I was very leaned forward in my chair. I wasn't comfy, but yeah, it was a fantastic game. Uh, a lot of silly mistakes, and I mean honestly, with South Africa's to lose, with the amount of penalties that they took, attempting to get 3 points, but they could just never get it. Their kicking game was just terrible for the level of that you'd expect at elite World Rugby Cup. I mean that's going to be something that they're going to have to fix. Not saying Ireland played flawlessly either. Or lineouts were shocking. Although in a sort of ironic, sort of a bit of an irony, Ireland beat ended the game by stopping. Hello, Kankaro. Hello, Kankaro King, lonely puppet man VTuber. Very nice guy. How are you? How are you? I was just talking about Ireland beating South Africa, but ironically, Ireland beat them in their own thing, or not their own thing. Sorry, I'm a little bit absent-minded today. I feel, but oh, thank you so much for the follows. Why am I not hearing them? I only noticed them. Okay, I think I should hear it now. But beat them by stopping their own lineouts. So South Africa at the last moment attempted to drive over the Irish line, which would have given them a chance to win the game, not just tie it. Uh, by a maul. So a maul in rugby is when now there's other ways that it can happen, but particularly it happens in the line out when a player goes up and is lifted off the ground to catch the ball and they come down. They can turn towards their team and their players will bind onto each other and attempt to drive forward, and then the opposing team will attempt to stop them driving. It's sort of like an impromptu scrum, but it's not as set piece. But what ended up happening was effectively if a maul forms and the maul is stopped or in some way breaks down, if the ball is not able to get out to the South Africa or the team with the ball, it's a turnover for the other team, essentially. But that happened in extra time. So the game ended. It was a little bit controversial because the ball was technically in the guy's hands, but like there was probably about 10 bodies just lying in a pile, 10 very sweaty and manly men in a pile. You can see why I for one would love rugby, and why I played it myself for a while. It's a very fun game. But I hope you're all doing well. I think actually, hang on, let me Vita as well. Thank you so much for the follow. Vita underscore X underscore 3. Very kind. Thank you. Welcome in. Welcome in. Alongside that, I mean, I went from watching that to immediately getting to watch Dante De Dallas, who is another VTuber, put on an amazing ECW show, Extreme Tuba Wrestling, and I would highly recommend his channel. It's probably some of the funnest that I've had. Just watching like a wrestling event, other than maybe it reminds me a lot of Germa wrestling and Germa Rumble. Let me just, there it is. Because I think how do you, wow. But it's really fun. I think it's really cool. Yeah, it's just shout out, isn't it? Just like apostrophe SO. I think this is how you do it. Ah. It's saying no matches. I don't know if that worked. I don't know how these things work. Someone's gonna have to teach me. But that was really fun. And then also I watched some of the boxing. I watched my main man Zhilei Zhang, otherwise known as Big Bang Zhang, a Chinese boxer, defeat for the second time, but this time in emphatic fashion by knocking him unconscious. The juggernaut Joe Joyce, who was for a long time seen as pretty much a granite chin, but threw a beautiful right hand, and Big Bang Zhang is a southpaw, so his power hand is his left hand, but he caught him with just a beautiful right hook that was just so perfectly timed that just right after, for the first couple of seconds, it looked like Joe was just unconscious. He was just a sleepy boy in the middle of the ring. But he somehow actually managed to get up, but he didn't get up in time for the 10 count. But I don't think there was a man alive that could have stood up to that blow. And the fact that Joe was even conscious after it is a fucking tremendous showing of how tough he is. I also felt really bad for Joe, because everything that I've seen of him in like videos and stuff, he seems like such a lovely guy, you know. He's not like a lot of the other boxers who are often very rude and showboaty and stuff, and you know, that's a part of the charm and of the fun. He just seems like such a good guy, but unfortunately he just came up against a very, very skilled and very powerful boxer in Zhilei Zhang. And it didn't help that the guy was southpaw either, or left-handed, I should say, for those of you who are not familiar with boxing terminology. But yeah, so that's kind of how I spent last night. It was very busy. A lot of sporting events. Other than that, I've been pretty good. It was pretty miserable today in terms of weather, so I didn't really get to do much. I went out for a small walk when the weather cleared up, but other than that, I've kind of just been chilling out, just been reading and been watching VTubers and stuff. I was looking at one of my Oshis in Niji Sanji. He got, I think I was explaining this, but he got like a hair, like for like a festival art picture of him and 3 others that he's in a group of. He got his hair was done up in such a way that he looked like a pineapple, and like I saw at least 4 or 5 tweets by people saying the exact same thing. It's raining here all day. It sucks. Although, like, personally, I prefer the cold and I prefer the kind of wintry weather. I love walking out of the house and breathing and having like the breath be visible. But when it's raining and you can't even enjoy that, that's when it is kind of lame. Unless it's like kind of stormy, then it's kind of nice. It's like you're listening to the wind and rain and the howl of things, and even sometimes the thunder and staring out trying to catch the lightning. It's often very nice. But yeah, it seems I think it's meant to be raining a lot here as well for the next couple of days. Hopefully, I mean, I've had to walk to the gym, uh, and been fairly drenched walking both over and back, for the past few days as well. So that wasn't fun, but it's okay. It builds up your immune system. At least I hope it does, or it just makes you sick. Either one. Either your genetics are strong enough, or you get sick. And that's how evolution works. Like, uh, don't get sick. I won't. I won't, Haru. I have a decently strong immune system. Although I do find when I do get sick, it tends to hit me fairly badly. Like I'll rarely get sick, but when it does happen, it's kind of rough. Same. But are you doing well, Haru? Are you having a nice day? God, I just looking at that Augie, the Augie face. I want one so bad. I want a Rua Augie. Such a perfect emote. Gucci as always, been chilling. Very nice, very nice. I feel like the weekends are the perfect time to chill out, or do something extravagant. Uh, I'm not looking forward to in a 2 weeks time. I will be very busy during the weeks, and I will be unable to stream for most of the week. Pretty much I'll only be able to stream on the weekends, which is unfortunate because starting off you want to be nice and consistent, but I simply just will not be here. But for until then, I'll be able to stream as much as I can, get some stuff in. I'm realizing I'm kind of close to the first kind of achievement, I guess. Although actually no, I'm gonna count streaming itself as an achievement. Thinking back to how nervous I always felt with clicking the start streaming button, just even like 2 weeks ago. Has it been 2 weeks, or has it been only like a week? I can't even remember. I think it's been about a little over a week. It's not as bad. It's still a little nerve-wracking, but I've been really enjoying it. But unfortunately, stuff, things to be able to accrue resources to buy things to live tend to be a little important. And that's why I have to go away for a little bit to do some training. But until then, we can chill out. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be continuing our reading of the Trojan War. Now, last time we read a little bit about the types of situations, or the kind of atmosphere that one would find among the war camps of. Don't worry, IRL comes first. As much as you might want to stream, sometimes things just happen. But we learned a little bit about armies in the field, about what living in the camp might have been like for the average soldier, how the average soldier, the peasant effectively, not of the nobility, would have been in pretty rough straits, often having to bring very little equipment, sometimes even having only their hands going to war, and being expected to just grab whatever they can find on the battlefield when someone is wounded or hurt, and how this often led to massive struggles for bodies, well equipped bodies that are slain. We also learned about some espionage, and how it seems Homer sort of teases a little bit that had the Trojans been a little bit more willing to engage in such actions as the Greeks were, at least he seems to portray such a thing by having the Greeks, the Achaeans, send two of their best men, Diomedes and Odysseus, out on a not a raiding, but an espionage mission, essentially. Although they were in dire straits and were hemmed in, near suffering their first and a major setback against the Trojans. While the Trojans sent out, I can't even remember his name, that's how little he matters, effectively a bumbling idiot, who ends up getting caught by the other two Achaeans. And then we saw how this espionage was often common in late medieval Bronze Age, according to some of the history that we have available to us through the surrounding texts that aren't necessarily Greek. Now, the next part, and I feel like we may be nearing a particularly climactic event the climactic event of the Iliad. But chapter 9, and I think we will get into it now. I'll just take a small sip of water. Chapter 9, Hector's Charge. She had begged him not to go. Having climbed up to the windy battlements of Troy, where islands glistened in distant outline, her eyes were focused on the figures on the plain below. She scanned the battlefield, searching for her husband, unable to stop herself from weeping like a widow. And then, suddenly, there he was, right beneath her in the paved streets of Troy, besides the Scaean Gate. He had made a quick trip to the town to organize a last-ditch appeal to the gods. She ran down the steps of the tower, followed by a wet nurse, whom she had ordered to bring the baby. Andromache, daughter of the late king Aetheon of Thebes under Placos, did not want to lose another man to Achilles' bronze spearhead, no matter how much her husband, Hector, was determined to prove himself in battle. She took their infant son from the nurse and held him against her breast, which were perfumed with oils of iris, tincture of rose or sage, or some other aromatic. Wordlessly, Hector smiled at the boy. His tearful wife grasped the warrior's arm and begged him to take pity on her and their child. She spoke wise words, telling Hector to stay on the defensive and guard the walls. But the prince paid no attention. For a moment he held the baby tenderly in his arms and prayed for the boy's future prowess, then returned him to Andromache. She stroked her cheek and promised he would hold his own in combat. Then she sent him back to what he considered women's work. All males are concerned with war, he said pointedly, and me most of all. 2 days had passed since that farewell. Hector had returned to battle. At home, Andromache worked at her loom, embroidering a purple cloak with flowers, an ancient talisman for bringing back a man. She had the servant woman put a cauldron of water on the fire, ready to give Hector a warm bath after the battle, but she had already led those same servants in a ceremony of ritual mourning for the man she never expected to see alive again. Hector at first brought his troops to the gates of the walls in front of the Greek ships. Then came the night when the Trojans camped out on the plain. Now on the second day of battle, and at dawn, they would begin the drive that Hector expected would bring them, torches in hand, to the Greek ships. The events of these second and third days of pitched battle take up fully one half of the Iliad, and this is only right, because they represent high noon in the lives of the poem's two chief protagonists. But when it comes to the fate of Troy, these 2 days were almost a sideshow, and so the military story is related more quickly than the personal drama. In Homer, the Olympians play an especially prominent role in these events. We might dismiss this as epic convention, but in fact it reflects the psychology of Bronze Age battlefield. The harder the fighting, the more religious ancient soldiers became. A direct attack against a well-defended position is never easy, even when the defender is on the rope. The war in these books of the Iliad is bloody and no holes barred. The Greeks were determined to defend every inch of ground, and they were disciplined enough to carry out a series of fighting retreats. Although most Greeks were war-weary, the Myrmidons were a strong and rested reserve force that would go into action upon the activation of a tripwire. The Trojan commander ignored warnings of the danger because he hungered for glory and shrank from disgrace. Hector's frontal assault on the Greeks was questionable from a military point of view, but it did what Bronze Age culture demanded of a king: to throw his army into battle and smash the enemy, as an Assyrian text put it. The fight began at dawn. The two sides were evenly matched throughout the morning, but in the midday heat, the Greeks broke through. They pushed the Trojans all the way back across the Scamander to the walls of Troy, only to be repulsed themselves. One by one, many of the best Greek warriors were wounded: Agamemnon, Diomedes, Odysseus, and the lesser but still important Eurypylus and Machaon. The Greeks were driven behind their trench and wall. Hector wanted to dispatch the chariots across the trench, but he was dissuaded by the Trojan seer Polydamas, son of Panthus. Reading the omens was standard practice in Bronze Age warfare. Hammurabi of Babylon, for example, announced that he would not have launched a major offensive without first consulting the gods. The details of an operation were also matters for consultation. If a seer turned out to be a judicious tactician, as Polydamas did, then all the better. On his advice, the Trojan attack was carried out on foot. Hector divided his men into 5 battalions and ordered them to breach the Greek ramparts. In furious fighting, the Lycians under Sarpedon, and Sarpedon, I believe, is actually a son of Zeus, and his lieutenant Glaucus almost broke through a gate, but the Greeks under Ajax and his brother Teucer held them off. Then, thanks to what seemed like divine intervention, Hector is alleged to have hurled a huge stone at the gate and smashed an opening through which his men poured. Repair the gate or suffer a heap of corpses, a Mesopotamian priest had advised the city governor, and the Greeks would have known just what that meant. The Greeks retreated in good order, adopting a tight defensive formation. Men said that Zeus's brother Poseidon had saved them by breeding confidence into the discouraged troops. And it even, in the Iliad, it states that supposedly Zeus, on the first day of fighting, I think it was, or it might have been the second, that Zeus rained down blood upon the Achaeans as a way to demoralize them, showing that the Greeks, the Trojans, were favored by Zeus, despite the fact that it was destined or so fated for Troy to fall. And I can imagine, if sometimes you can see rain falling in one place but not in the other, and if you had armies separated by a significant distance in which they would then march to meet up, and on one side heavy enough rain falls, it could certainly be a significant demoralizer. It doesn't necessarily have to be rain of blood. Excuse me. They regrouped, and, with the 2 Ajaxes as leaders, they demonstrated the Greeks' disciplined excellence. A chosen phalanx, firm, resolved as fate, descending Hector and his battle weight. An iron scene gleams dreadful o'er the fields, armour and armour locked, and shields and shields. Spears lean on spears, on targets throng, helms stuck to helms, and man drove man along. Thus breathing death in terrible array, the close compacted legions urged their way. The phalanx stopped the Trojans. Furious hand-to-hand fighting ensued, in which the Greeks got the better of things, especially against the 3rd Trojan battalion. Its leaders, Priam's sons, Helenus and Deiphobus, were both wounded and obliged to retreat to Troy, while the third in command, Asius, was killed, as was his son Adamas. Following Polydamas's advice once again, Hector pulled his troops back to regroup, but earlier he had brushed off Polydamas's interpretation of an omen as cautioning against a Trojan attack on the ships. Nor did Hector really take seriously the seer's warning about Achilles, a man insatiable for war waits besides the ships, and I don't think he will hold back for the whole battle. Hector was at his best and worst that day. He was as reckless as he was courageous, as arrogant as he was proud, as principled as he was selfish, as intractable as he was firm. Hector was more consistent than the Greek commanders, who so lost their nerve that it seemed miraculous when they regained it, but ultimately he was less effective. When he rallied his men for a new charge, Hector succeeded only in taking a direct hit on the chest from a stone hurled by Telamonian Ajax. He blacked out, but was saved by a crowd of Trojans champions who carried him off the field and had him brought quickly to the rear by chariot. Water from the Scamander revived him long enough for him to vomit, and then Hector lost consciousness again. It was a decisively bad break for Troy. The resurgent Greeks forced the Trojans into retreat beyond the walls and trench and followed them out onto the plain. By this time, Hector had recovered and rallied the army. In real life, no man could have bounced back so quickly from a thoracic contusion, not to mention a concussion suffered earlier in the day, and I can confirm that concussions are not enjoyable. But Hector seemed to enjoy the miraculous intervention of Zeus, as Homer has it. Zeus had discovered the other gods' tricks, and now intervened on the Trojan side. He even had Apollo, perhaps Iari to the Trojans, smooth the ground for an advance by the Trojan chariots. Seeing the Trojans regroup, the Greeks began an orderly retreat, with the mass of men falling back to the ships, and an elite of champions and their best followers out in front. But once the attack began and the gods gave glory to the Trojans, the Greeks ran in panic like frightened cattle or sheep. Scattered duels did little to slow the Trojans' steady advance, killing Greeks until they had reached the ships again. This time, the Trojans drove their chariots into the camp. They needed them as platforms from which to fight those Greeks who took to the ship decks, and brandished long naval pikes. Meanwhile, on the ground between the ships, other Greeks formed a solid wall. The Trojans smelled victory. The Greeks knew that the war could be lost in an hour. Both sides fought with the ferocity of fresh troops. This was no long-distance exchange of arrows and javelins, but rather a ferocious brawl where the weapons were swords, pikes, battle-axes, and everyday hatchets. The earth flowed black with blood. Ajax refused to give up. He leaped from ship to ship with his pike, but little by little, Hector's inspired leadership drove the Greeks back from the first row of ships to the huts that lay beyond. As Hector grabbed hold of the ship's sternpost, he issued a simple command: "Bring fire." Could these thrilling words have been spoken without a shiver? Could they have been followed by any prouder shout than the battle cry that Hector now commanded his men to raise in unison? He called out, "Zeus has granted us today, as recompense for everything, the chance to take the ships that came here against the gods' will, and brought us much suffering." The Trojans pressed forward with renewed force, while Ajax lunged with his spear and bellowed to his men to stand and die. Sweating, breathless, and sore from holding up his shield, his ears ringing from the clash of spears against his helmet, Ajax held his ground. But then Hector reached him and sliced through the ash wood of Ajax's spear with his great sword. Ajax was forced to retreat as the Trojan torches began to burn the ship. It was, says Homer, none other than the vessel that had once carried Prostylus, the first man to fall at Troy. The long day's battle was a confusion of sounds, human, animal, avian, inanimate, and meteorological, or, as the ancients would have said, divine. A dying cry, or the roar of a group of men, piercing or roaring, whistling or thwacking, clanging or thudding, laughing or fulminating, verbal or grunted, shrill or subdued, commanded or uttered in lamentation, words honeyed or harsh, exhortatory or terrified. The field echoed with the thunder of horses' hoofs as they drew two men chariots into battle, and if the driver and warrior fell, rattled with the eerie sound of empty chariots, horses fleeing. Who is that over the hill? That just announced their arrival by horn. Mana Songwriting, welcome in, welcome in. Thank you so much for raiding me and for actually, in fact, being my very first raid. Wizard raid. Nice, nice. Mana Songwriting, are you, I can only assume that you must be in some way a writer. Welcome in, welcome in. How are you? What were you streaming? How do I check what you were streaming? Indeed, I write web novels. Ooh, very cool, very cool. I used to do a little bit of writing myself, but it was always in the the fan fiction side of things. I was playing Warcraft 3 Night Elf campaign. I never played Warcraft. I've only watched like some silly videos of people like leveling up to like the max level in silly ways, but I hope it was fun. Night Elf. Is that like a is that like the is that like a specific campaign of Warcraft 3, or is that just what you're playing? Oh, ooh, is that what you're doing, Haru? But no, thank you so much for showing up. We're just reading the Trojan War. Thank you so much, Striped Pantsu underscore channel for the follow. Based taste is all I will say to your name, but welcome in, welcome in. Thank you so much. There are many campaigns with each race. Ah, okay, cool, cool. But no, I'm glad you had a nice stream. Again, thank you so much for coming in. One with each race. I get you. I get you. Did you make good progress, or I assume you're probably well acquainted with Warcraft 3. Did you kind of are you working through it well enough? Didn't get caught at any moments or any difficult missions? Very good progress. Just had a bit of a hiccup on a hard level. Ah, is it what's difficult about it? Is it like you don't have much resources, or it's just an awkward situation? Is the game just being unfair, just throwing way too much at you, or is it just a skill issue? Skill issue. Well, look, here's the good thing about a skill issue. You can improve. You can get over that skill issue. You can, and when you do beat it, you can feel good. I leveled up. Ooh, nice. Nice. Now you can continue leveling up and beat the game. I'm going to take a moment to have a sip. So you're a wizard, Manasong, are you? I assume from your raid message. That's very cool. Is that like is that just from your interest in what I can only assume is maybe like fiction, Lord of the various things like that, or are you like a practicer of the occult? Tell me a little bit about you. Yeah, I write fantasy, so I'm a multiverse wizard. Ooh, oh, so is it like how would I describe it? Like the stories that you write as a wizard are universes in of themselves in some way. Why did my files just open up and appear at the front of my screen? Manasong, you better not be writing anything weird that's about to happen to my computer. I love world building, so I can magically create universes. That's a pretty powerful ability. Of course, my question to you, Manasong, would be, are you created in some way? Are you the divine wellspring of all of creation from which everything flows? The fact that you're typing on my keyboard probably suggests not. Or you're typing in my chat, probably not, but you are the source of creation and the wellspring of all those stories that you create. They all spring from your mind. So that's very cool. Gotta keep the balance. But I will have to check out your authors rarely participate in their stories. Isn't there like uh hmm. Isn't there like some concept in like the comics? It was one of the comics anyway of like the author, like that's just his name. He's essentially God, but like it's sort of like a meta character. Maybe in like DC or something, or in one like maybe Superman meets him, or and Superman's like, I can beat you, and then he just like erases his existence as an author can. But no, it's very cool. I will check out some of your streams. Hopefully I can catch you live sometime. But thank you again for coming in. I suppose we might continue with the reading now. So as I was saying, also I do write a lot of lewdness. So be warned if you check out my stories. No bother at all. No bother. That's fine. I wouldn't be one for regularly reading such content. But I enjoy it, especially if it's well done. But yes, no, not at all, not at all. You didn't interrupt at all. It's very much, it's lovely to be able to talk to someone a little bit, and especially a fellow VTuber. So thank you again. So for those of you who are new, we are reading a story, or not a story, a book about the history of the Trojan War, which weaves both narrative and archaeological and textual evidence from the time that the Trojan War took place, roughly the late Bronze Age, in comparison to if you excuse me a moment. Sorry, I had to do something. But yes, it follows the story of Troy, while also looking at the evidence surrounding that period, and finds in many cases that actually much of what Homer kind of postulates and talks about, of course, leaving aside the mythological aspects of the gods fighting, although he does tie this into the importance of religion and of the gods at that time period, especially for the kings, and for the warriors when they were fighting. So there is still an aspect in which he is staying true to kind of that Homer is anyway, staying true to that period. But I think it's a very interesting book. We're coming near the end, but we're currently reading about the fated interaction, or fated meeting between Achilles, or at least leading up to it, the battle between the Trojans and the Achaeans, right before it. The sights of battle were terrible, as men hacked and lunged at each other. There were lightning like flashes of bronze, as at the Greek ramparts, a storm of stones rained down on the Trojans, followed by a hail of splinters where the wall was breached. The two armies fought in the soft light at dawn, under the hot midday sun, and in the evening, through clouds of dust, up hills and down muddy riverbanks, past windy trees and ancient tombs. At the battle's start, Zeus sent a rainstorm of blood, which might refer to the real-life phenomenon of showers that deposit red dust carried from the Sahara Desert, still seen in the Aegean today. Ah, I had only been thinking that maybe it was just a reference to soldiers being rained on as they marched to battle, perhaps from two armies being able to see each other, but the distance being so great that one is capable of being in the rain while the other isn't, and how that might have a demoralizing effect. But this seems to have an actual meteorological explanation. The seesaw of battle was dizzying. Soldiers massed and scattered, advanced and retreated as if in some mad dance. The battle raged back and forth, half a dozen times, over the 2-mile wide plain, forcing the men to cover an exhausting distance. The many ascents and descents of the swale leading up from the plain to the Greek camp would have left men with sore calves and aching lungs. Those who had chariots must have been grateful for the ride. Between Troy and the Greek ship station lay heaps of corpses, horse and human, both fresh corpses and the victims of the fighting the day before, since there had been no truce to retrieve the dead. Many of the human bodies, stripped naked, were covered only by encrusted blood. Some were missing limbs. Others had been crushed under chariot wheels. Within 24 hours the cadavers would have exuded the pungent odour of death, sweet and sharp. But it would have been only a matter of minutes after death before insects attacked the corpses, and birds and dogs would have followed shortly after. I do apologise for anyone who is attempting to relax and being met with such gruesome imagery. But one should expect it in a story of war. I find the idea of someone settling down for ASMR, getting cozy in bed, and suddenly they're reading about decaying corpses. It's still relaxing. Hello, Torn Kite. Welcome in. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. You were with Mana Song. It's still relaxing. I don't know if that says more about. No, I think that just says a lot about you, Torn Kite. At least it's not me out there experiencing all those terrible things. Yeah, I guess that's how you could be relaxed from it. You could wrap yourself in a blanket and be like, at least it's not me. Okay. The Trojan plain would have been thick with vultures and crows, scattering when the men approached, and returning when they left. Dogs would have grown fat on the abundance of human flesh. Swarms of flesh flies would have accompanied the armies on their march. Butterflies and eagles would have fed on the carrion as well. No one on either side, would have any excuse not to know what awaited the fallen. The Trojans were fighting for their homes, but the Greeks were free to load their ships and leave. No wonder Homer has the day's fighting begin with a visitation to the Greek camps by Eris, the goddess of strife. She emitted such a loud and shrill cry that it goaded the men to think that war was sweeter than sailing in their hollow ships to their dear fatherland. Sweet, sweet Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude. How do you pronounce it? Schadenfreude. Whatever. There was an encouraging start, but not enough to maintain fighting spirit for the whole long and bloody day. Neither side could have kept going with continual exhortations from the leadership. Battles such as this are won not by material, but by men. Hector, Agamemnon, Sarpedon, both Ajaxes, Odysseus, Diomedes, and others addressed the troops from time to time, alternatively scolding and encouraging them. It was vital, too, for orders to be given clearly. These leaders told the men when to fan out, when to form tight masses, when to attack and when to fall back. Command and control on the late Bronze Age battlefield was primitive, depending on speeches from the top, on trumpet calls and hoisted banners. A booming voice was no small advantage. Small wonder that the intensity of a man's battle cry was taken as a sign of warrior prowess. Less dramatic, but equally important, were the subordinate officers who spread the word, especially in the Trojan army, where orders had to be given in a number of different languages. But all the speeches in the world could not have driven one particular emotion from the soldiers' hearts, and that was fear. The favourable omen of an eagle's flight on the right, the feeling of a comrade standing close by, the sound of an enemy in flight, all provided temporary relief. Even so, no one from the sword-bearers to Agamemnon escaped without a moment of terror that day. As a Babylonian hymn says, the war god shines with a frightening gleam. The flames of Prostylus's ship fired Hector's imagination, but they also marked the beginning of his end. With an almost mathematical logic, his success entailed his failure, because it reawakened Achilles. As the tide began to turn against the Greeks, Nestor planted an idea in the mind of Patroclus. Although Achilles had sworn off battle, he, Patroclus, could fight in his behalf. Nestor said, "If thou but lead the Myrmidon line, clad in Achilles' arms, if thou appear, proud Troy may tremble and desist from war." After the briefest of hesitations, Achilles agreed to let Patroclus wear his armour, lead his Myrmidons, and save the ships. In fact, Achilles was so concerned that, as soon as he saw the flames of the burning ships, he told Patroclus to hurry up. The only condition Achilles placed was that he conduct a limited operation. Patroclus could drive the enemy out of the camp, but under no circumstances was he to press on to Troy. That might anger some god, Achilles said. And besides, it would diminish Achilles' honour. Patroclus agreed to these terms. Achilles did everything he could to help his men, except fight. He tore the huts and roused the Myrmidon to arms. He sent them off with a rousing pre-battle speech, and he took the precaution of pouring a libation to Zeus. Patroclus also added his own words about the men's glorious reputation, and their ever more glorious commander, not forgetting to dishonour Agamemnon. Not for nothing was Patroclus the perfect second in command. "Think you, Achilles, sees you fight, be brave, and humble the proud monarch whom you save." The Myrmidons attacked the Trojans like ravenous wolves. They drove the enemy back from the burning ship of Prostylus, and put out the fire, but it was a harder fight to clear them from the camp. The Trojans held their ground inside the wall. Only after fierce hand-to-hand combat did the Greeks prevail. The Trojans were propelled into a pell-mell flight that left a number of chariots stuck in the trench, the horses having broken free, but the men sitting ducks for Greek bronze. Back on the plain, Patroclus cut off the Trojans' leading battalions in their retreat to Troy, and forced them to stand and fight. The result was bloody but triumphant for the Greeks. Of the many Trojan casualties, the most important by far was Sarpedon, a man who claimed to be the son of Zeus, or the storm god, king of Lycia, and one of Troy's main allies. His lieutenant, Glaucus, suffered from a hand wound, having been bit by one of Teucer's arrows during the Trojan attack on the walls. But Glaucus knew that his honour depended on the recovery of Sarpedon's body, so nothing could have held him back. He made a blunt approach to Hector. The allies felt abandoned, so he had better help fight for the corpse. And he did. Hector's men engaged in a bitter hand-to-hand battle, but the Greeks won. Accepting failure, Hector remounted his chariot and called a retreat. The Greeks stripped Sarpedon's armour while even the heavens sighed. As Homer says, Apollo spirited his corpse back home to Lycia. It was a total triumph for the Myrmidons. In a moment of inspiration, the Trojans had recognized Patroclus's identity, but that wasn't enough to help them stop him. Then Patroclus got carried away. He disobeyed Achilles' orders, and went in thunderous pursuit across the plains to the walls of Troy. There he made 3 assaults on the wall. Homer says that he had climbed the parapet and was pushed back 3 times before giving up. Presumably a support company had brought ladders with him. Homer has Apollo call Patroclus down from the walls, just as he talks Hector into rejoining the battle, instead of bringing his men to the safety behind the walls. Hector ordered his chariot to go after Patroclus, but the Greek was ready. Patroclus killed Hector's latest charioteer, Cebriones. I believe that's the fort, at least at the very least the third, but it might be the fourth charioteer that Hector has had died. The two men dismounted and fought over the body, joined by their followers. Again, the Greeks won. By now it was late afternoon. There was still time for Patroclus to make 3 charges into the Trojan ranks, on which Homer has him kill no fewer than 27 men. Homer mentions by name another 27 Trojans whom Patroclus slew that day, as well as an indeterminate number of others, for a total of more than 54. No single warrior could have carried out all the killing that Homer attributes to Patroclus on his vengeful spree, but with Patroclus at their head, fresh troops like the Myrmidons would have ripped a bloody hole in the Trojan lines. And I think also, just a quick mention, the constant fighting over bodies, I imagine, would be not just a sense of honor if they're a particularly high noble, but also the fact that if they are a noble or they're a particularly good warrior, they likely have very good gear that isn't easily found anywhere else. I'm almost imagining it like a scrum, like the body falls and it's like the ball being put in between the two teams, the teams of forwards in a scrum, and they're trying to drive each other back and take it themselves. But now Patroclus's luck had run out. Divine intervention, or a loose strap, caused him to lose his armour, and a young Trojan named Euphorbus, son of Panthos, took advantage by hurling his spear into Patroclus's back. Seeing his chance for glory, after Euphorbus had removed his javelin, Hector forced his way through the ranks and speared Patroclus in the belly. This was the most vulnerable part of the trunk and a favourite spot in Homer's epics, along with the neck for administering the death blow. No wonder a Syrian general referred to annihilating an enemy as smashing his belly. The fight for Patroclus's body raged until sunset. I believe as well, in the Iliad, Apollo, I think it's Apollo anyway, stabs Patroclus in a sort of like divine intervention. I think he stabs him as well. The fight for Patroclus's body raged until sunset. Hector had mixed success. He had to suffer charges of cowardice from Glaucus for not having recovered Sarpedon's corpse. He also lost his close friend Podes, son of Aethon, a regular guest at Hector's table, and Hector failed to secure the ultimate prize of Achilles' horses, which had pulled Patroclus's chariot. They escaped. But Hector did manage to claim Achilles' armour, and to drive the enemy back across the plain to their camp. The news of Patroclus's death was a bitter blow to Achilles, but he recovered sufficiently to go to the Greek trench, where he boomed in a voice that, like a pharaoh's war cry, frightened all the land. According to Homer, Achilles had only to roar 3 times, and the Trojans retreated far enough for the Greeks to retrieve Patroclus's body. By now it was too dark to continue the fight. The Trojans held an assembly. Once again Polydamas gave the soundest advice. Go back to Troy, camp in the marketplace, and at dawn man the walls. They were impregnable, even to Achilles. As Polydamas put it, so may his rage be tired and laboured down, and dogs shall tear him ere he sack the town. It was good advice, but Hector rejected it. He scorned retreating now that Zeus or the storm god had decided to give him glory. Not for the last time in history, a general would claim to have God on his side. The Trojans were convinced. Rapturously they cheered Hector's speech and put his plan into effect. They would camp out again on the plain, and at dawn return to battle, Achilles or not. Now comes one of the most memorable parts of the Iliad. The death of Patroclus gave birth to a new Achilles, older and wiser. Achilles confesses the error of his past ways and decides to return to battle, although not before accepting the gifts that Agamemnon had offered. The next day, presented by the gods with matchless new armour and a marvellous shield, and I believe it's his I believe it's his mother, Thetis, who goes to, oh, what is the name of the Greek god of the forge? Her, oh, what is it again? Let me check. Greek god of forge. Hephaestus, that's it. Hephaestus. She gets Hephaestus to, yeah, thank you, laughs a lot. Hephaestus smits him his new armor. Oh, I just I want to mention as well. It's said earlier in the book that Zeus wisened up to the god's tricks. One of the tricks was pulled by his wife Hera. She wants to get his attention away from the battle so that Poseidon and the other Greek favoring gods can interfere. So she goes to Aphrodite and convinces her to give her a breastplate, essentially, that contains, I believe it's like love and longing. And then she goes to the goddess for sleep. And her plan essentially is she goes up, and it sounds about right. It's she goes up to Zeus, and the idea with this Aphrodite breastplate is that no man can resist it, and apparently no god can resist it either. For it drives Zeus insane when he sees Hera in it, and he immediately makes love to her. At which point he then falls asleep, and thus the gods are able to now interfere. I find it so funny that like the idea of Zeus just like getting down and dirty, just incensed by this like by Aphrodite's love artifact, and then just immediately falling asleep. Where were we? The next day, presented by the gods with matchless new armor and a marvelous shield, the heroes slaughtered a crowd of Trojans. He fights even the Scamander River in a display of the sort of superhuman power attributed to the pharaohs. Although I think he loses. He's about to die, until one of the gods saves him. But yeah, he does the spirits. He's throwing bodies into the river. And the spirits come up and ask him to stop, and he's like, okay, sure, but I'm going to keep killing. And apparently the spirits don't like that either. So he dives in and he starts fighting with the river itself. The Trojans must have been very confused just watching this like insane man stabbing a river. Finally Achilles hunts down Hector. The tragic education of an arrogant young hero is one of literature's oldest themes, antique already in Homer's day, and dating back to Mesopotamia's Epic of Gilgamesh around 2000 BC. Could anyone tell the tale more eloquently than Homer does in the latter books of the Iliad? Literature aside, in military terms these scenes are important mainly in the negative. With the deaths of Homer and then Achilles, the Trojan War would continue in a different form, with new leaders and new tactics. Homer narrates a double tragedy. Achilles versus Hector, with Patroclus triangulated between the two. The reality was probably more prosaic. Achilles says that he is avenging Patroclus out of loyalty to a friend who was his soulmate, his very life, and out of shame also for having let him down. However, if Achilles did not kill Hector, he would have been finished as a warlord, as even Achilles admits. While Patroclus and many of his other companions had been slaughtered during Hector's offensive, Achilles had sat out the war by the ships, a useless weight on the ground. The Myrmidons would not long have tolerated a leader who was unable to make good on his failure. Achilles protests that he knows that by killing Hector, he is signing his own death warrant. The fates had decreed that his death would follow fast on Hector's. What else could he have said, given the prophecy? Besides, he loved war. The odor of death was in his nostrils. Achilles had no other way of salvaging his reputation except by killing Hector. He said this clearly to his divine mother, or as we might put it today, he said in a moment of honesty, "Let me this instant rush into the fields, and reap what glory life's short harvest yields." Friendship was fleeting, but fame was immortal. Achilles had his priorities clear. Achilles would have preferred to begin his fight at dawn the next day, but the preliminaries could not be overlooked. There had to be a formal reconciliation with Agamemnon, and afterwards Odysseus prevailed upon Achilles that there be a sacrifice and rest before going into battle. War booty also had to be displayed to the men in order to stir their lust for battle. Then Achilles led them out. The Greeks were struck so hard and the enemy ran so fast that after it was over, as soon as a Trojan found safety behind the walls, his first thought was not relief, but quenching his thirst. The old Achilles had disappeared. The amiable buccaneer who preferred ransoming an enemy to slaughtering him was now a killing machine. His victims included 2 more sons of Priam, Polydorus and his brother Lycaon, a man whom Achilles had earlier spared and sold into slavery, although I suppose he speared him this time. Achilles ignored his pleas for mercy. Most Trojans ran at the mere sight of Achilles. Of those who stood their ground, only a rare few, like Aeneas, lived to tell the tales, and then only thanks to divine intervention. What made Achilles such a successful warrior was that he had strength and speed, and superb soldiers to support him. His reputation alone was enough to panic most enemies, which gave him a huge psychological advantage. In an afternoon on the battlefield, the Iliad's Achilles kills at least 36 Trojans. It was a smaller tally of victims than Patroclus's, but it was no less a reminder that the Bronze Age liked its heroes hot. Achilles' final victim was Hector, courageous enough to stand and face him when he might have retreated behind the city walls. Hector nonetheless had second thoughts, but then he thought of the shame that he would face. Hector had to admit that Polydamas had been right about the danger of an enemy led by Achilles. He himself had been a fool, and the Trojan army had paid a terrible price. In spite of his fears about public dishonor, in the end, Hector ran. Panicked by Achilles' approach, he sprinted off, only to be followed by the great runner. They circled the city 3 times. Indeed, there are indications in Homer that the poet thought of them as circling the entire Trojan plain 3 times, a distance of 36 miles or more. Finally recovering his courage, Hector stood and fought. And I believe in the story, supposedly, I think it's Hera, or it might be one of the other gods, appears and stops him, disguised as one of his friends, and states that together they can take Achilles. So he stops and turns to face Achilles, and they both throw their spears, and he turns to take the lance or some other weapon from his friend, but he finds that the god has disappeared, and thus he decides, realizing that the fate of the gods had now, or the favor of the gods was gone from him. He resigned himself to his fate and charges Achilles. Achilles threw his javelin and missed, but recovered it through divine intervention, or a dash to retrieve it. Hector struck Achilles' shield with his javelin. Then he drew his sword and rushed Achilles. But the Greek was ready, and drove his spear into Hector's neck. The Trojan fell to the ground, and, with a prophecy of Achilles' approaching doom, he died. The thrust to the Greek ships was the high water mark of the Trojan army's resistance. Never again would it pose such a threat. The Trojans followed the wrong strategy. They should have let the Greeks tire themselves out. In recent times, Muhammad Ali brought such a tactic to boxing, the rope-a-dope. Although I will say, you want to be very, very good and very, very tough to employ such a strategy. Impatient, arrogant, and hungry for glory, Hector could not accept low-intensity tactics in a defensive strategy. he went after a decisive battle. The withdrawal of Achilles and the Myrmidons had marked the breakdown of the Greek coalition. Hector should have taken advantage of it by doing precisely nothing. A good rule of war is never stop an enemy from trying to withdraw. Instead, Hector did the worst possible thing by launching a frontal attack on the Greek camp. He drove Achilles and the company right back into the other Greeks' arms. The death of Hector might have been a turning point, but it did not mean that the war was lost. On the contrary, it might have worked to Troy's advantage. The Trojans still had a lot of fight in them, and what is more, they had a real chance of putting that spirit to good use. They could still inflict casualties on the enemy. They still defended an impregnable fortress, and they still enjoyed the comparative advantage of an urban base. The Greeks were stuck in their wretched camp. The Trojans could wait them out, especially if they replenished their ranks with new allies. But Hector's family did not see things that way. King Priam and Queen Hecuba watched their son's death from the battlements, where they had earlier called down and pleaded with him not to risk battle with Achilles. Now they were inconsolable with their grief. Hector's wife, Andromache, was at home, preparing the house for her husband's return, when she heard the cries of lamentation. Fearing the worst, Andromache took 2 servants as escorts and ran to the city walls. From a high tower she scanned the battlefield for Hector. Achilles had attached Hector's naked body to a chariot by leather thongs clinched through holes in Hector's tendons. Hector's long hair streamed into dust as Achilles whipped his horses across the plain, dragging the cadaver behind him in triumph. And I believe as well in the Iliad, before their duel, I believe Hector requests to Achilles to whoever loses to be treated with honor and respect, but Achilles denies such a thing. Did that say true holes in his tendons? Yes, it did. It says leather thongs clinched through holes in Hector's tendons. So sounds pretty rough, but I guess he's dead, so it such painful things. That is horrific. It sort of gives you an idea of, I guess, the violence. Haru, just eating popcorn. But that is the end of that chapter. The next chapter being titled Achilles' Heel. How long is it? Let me check. Okay, it's only about 10 pages, so we can definitely get through that. Drown check. Time for water. And stretch. Yeah, good idea. I'll take a sip. Damn, wonder what's gonna happen there. I don't know. I assume Achilles is gonna be fine. I mean, the dude's so powerful and strong and capable and handsome and tall and speedy. I mean, how's he gonna die? He's literally like the main character. Yeah, I'm gonna stretch. Plot armor. Yeah. I actually kind of needed that. Even though I do still sit kind of with decent posture, I definitely find if you're just sitting in one place, you definitely get stiff after a bit. Oh. Sir Laughs a Lot, how are you actually? I didn't ask. Thank you for joining. Thank you. Welcome in. I hope everyone's enjoying the reading so far. I am living the dream. Excellent, excellent. Bunkum. Oh, sorry. I apologize. I didn't see your chat. I just see it now when looking up. I saw first time chat. is comfy. The nature noises enhances it. Thank you so much for joining, and for chatting. In bed now after planning lesson for teaching this week. Ooh, sounds very cool. It is very comfy. Yeah. So after you have everything planned and you're nice and ready to go, that's cool. The nature noises enhances it. That's good. I actually I do quite like this BGM, or I should say the sounds in this forest. It's very comfy, very comfortable. Oh God, no, Lamau. I had 3 lessons planned. They just took forever. Oh no. Um, Sounds like a lot of work planning a lesson, making sure you hit all the points. But good luck. Good luck with your teaching. You'll have to wake up tomorrow and go into work teaching. I assume children, but you'll do well. I know it. But Bunkum, again, thank you so much for joining us. Okay. Take one more sip of water. Much appreciated. First class kids. Ah, okay. So they'll be a little. Oh no, Haru. Haru, oh no. You forgot to do your homework. Well, do you still have time? Oh wait, no, isn't it like the daytime for you now? Or am I mixing up other people's time zones? Hopefully you still have time to do it and it is not too difficult. I know that panic that is induced whenever you're like, especially when you're like lying in bed and you're just drifting off to sleep, and then you get reminded like, oh no, I have an essay due tomorrow. It often happened to me with it's night, I have time. Excellent, excellent. Although you, it looks like you're not going to enjoy it. Yeah, it's always rough. But it often happened to me sometimes where it would be like, if there was like, oh, have this done for, on Monday, have this done for Thursday. So I'd leave that and I'd do all the work that I need to do for the next day. And then it would just kind of leave my mind and I would forget to tick it off. And then it's only like the night before as I'm going to sleep that I get reminded, or even like the morning of, and I'm speedily trying to do it. Or you just kind of hope that you don't get asked. But I believe in you, Haru. You can get through it decently. You got this. And I can be background noise. On Oh, that probably needs on God, I think. Yeah. So relatable. Just hope my teacher forgets. It'll be fine. I'm visualizing it. I'm gonna use what's that book called again? The Secret or something. If you visualize it, it'll happen. It hasn't worked for me with a significant other yet, but I'm holding out hope. I'm sure many of us know that pain. I'm gonna go back to the book. Chapter 10. Achilles' heel. Sweet as it was to drive his spearhead through Hector's neck, to spit out taunts, no fewer than 3 times, about the dogs and birds that would soon eat the dying man's corpse, to strip off his I go lurk, no worries, to strip off his stolen armour from the Trojan's body, to see his comrades poke the still warm flesh with their spears, and to raise the victory paean among the Greeks. It was not enough for Achilles. Achilles brought the corpse back to his camp and dumped it before Patroclus's bier. It lay there until after his friend's funeral, when Achilles hitched up his chariot and dragged the cadaver around Patroclus's tomb 3 times. Like Hittite and Egyptian generals, the Greek leader mistreated his enemy corpses. I believe in the Iliad, the corpses prevented from rotting or being too damaged by Apollo. At first, the gods displayed no objection. Presumably, they communicated through their priests. In fact, Zeus allowed Hector to be dishonored in his native lands. But after 9 days, enough was enough, and Zeus insisted that Achilles return the corpse to Troy for burial or suffer divine retribution. Hector's corpse had not begun to rot, and the dogs had kept their distance. Miracle both, unless 9 days merely means a long time. Achilles' behaviour shocks us, but perhaps not as much as his cold-blooded slaughter of 12 noble Trojan youths before Patroclus's pyre. The great hero himself had captured them in battle expressly for this purpose. Meanwhile, a revisionist version of Hector's story began circulating. The real Hector was a self-absorbed, often sharp-tongued martinet, whose honour was more important to him than his country's safety. A man who imagined his wife suffering in captivity, but had hastened it by his actions. A man who had rejected the prudence that would have saved his own life, and that of many of his comrades. Now he became a selfless martyr for his homeland. Excuse me. Oh, I almost knocked something off my desk. The Iliad tells how Priam journeyed courageously at night across the plain to the Greek camp, and at the risk of his own life, begged Achilles for Hector's corpse. The old man fell to his knees before Achilles and kissed the Greek's murderous hands. It was humiliating, but Priam was engaged in a classic gesture of prostration and self-abasement, and just as the enemy of the Hittite king might signal his surrender by offering valuable gifts, in one example a throne and scepter, both made of iron, so Priam came laden with treasures. In all of these cases, a tit-for-tat exchange was understood on the part of the winner. The Greeks granted a truce of 11 days so that Hector's funeral could take place. Afterwards, the war continued. Only a few details of what followed are found in Homer, and mainly in the Odyssey, rather than the Iliad. For more, the reader has to turn to what is left of the other poems of the epic cycle. Only sketchy summaries and a few quotations survive from the Cypria, Aethiopis, Little Iliad, Sack of Ilium, and the Returns. These accounts were embroidered by such later writers of antiquity as Pindar, the Attic tragedians, Virgil, Statius, Dictys of Crete, Quintus Smyrnaeus, and Apollodorus, not to mention Herodotus and Thucydides. Where Homer is severe and restrained, some of these other authors revel in gossipy details. The Greek and Trojan generals took the path of least resistance. Each side having failed thus far in its objectives, the Greek generals' recipes on both sides was more pitched battle. The Aethiopis tells the story of a woman warrior named Penthesilea. Ciliae. It's sort of broken up halfway from one line to the next, so it's a little awkward to read. Penthesilea. She was an Amazon, a Thracian, and so-called daughter of Ares, who came to help the Trojans fight. Penthesilea enjoyed a day of glory on the battlefield until she confronted Achilles, who killed her. Homer does not mention her, but he offers a few other details about the Amazonians. He refers to them as, quote, women who were equivalent to men, and he names 2 heroes who fought them in battle, King Priam in his younger days, and a certain Bellerophontes, who was the grandfather of the Lycian warrior Glaucus, comrade of Sarpedon. These clashes took place years before the Trojan War. Although Penthesilea is a Greek name, Amazon itself is probably not a Greek word. Priam is said to have fought the Amazons on the Sangarius River in Phrygia, around 350 miles east of Troy. This is far from modern Thrace, which is in southeastern Europe, but the ancients sometimes imagined Thrace as including northwest Anatolia. It was left to later writers of antiquity to elaborate other details about Amazons, making them man-haters who killed their own husbands, placing them geographically in Anatolia's Black Sea region, having them attack Athens and pitting them against such Greek heroes as Heracles and Theseus. Penthesilea is said to have come to Troy with 12 other Amazon women, and to have distinguished herself in action. She is also supposed to have been so beautiful that, after Achilles took off the dead woman's helmet and saw her face, he fell in love. Women warriors may have seemed outlandish in much of his history, but not so today when, for example, several 100,000 women serve in the US military, nor are women soldiers unknown historically. The best documented case may be that of the corpse of women archers and spear fighters in 18th and 19th century Dahomey. Good soldiers, they were trusted as royal bodyguards, and they had a propaganda value to boot, because men felt insulted to be matched in battle with women. No other all-female units are known in the ancient world, but there were several Joans of Arcs, from Artemisia of Halicarnassus in 480 BC, the first recorded female admiral, to Boadicea, the British queen who commanded troops against the Roman army in AD 61. Boadicea, I'm pretty sure. Oops. At sites in southern Russia and Ukraine, archaeologists have found dozens of graves of women buried with weapons. Swords, daggers, bows, quivers, arrowheads, spearheads, horse trappings, and jewellery, as well as household objects, are among the objects discovered. In some cases, the women's bones demonstrates that they were accustomed to horse riding, heavy use of the bow, and possibly even that they died in battle. The earliest of such graves date to around 600 BC, the latest to around 400 years afterwards. The skeletons represent 3 Iron Age cultures: Scythian, Saromachian, and Sarmachian. No archaeological evidence of women warriors has been found for Bronze Age, but the Iron Age discoveries raise at least the possibility that they did exist. Thersites resurfaces in the Aethiopus to rebuke Achilles for allegedly having fallen in love with Penthesilea. Achilles did not respond well to criticism, and Thersites paid with his life. Later writers claim that Thersites was Diomedes' cousin, but no army could tolerate a warrior who killed one of its own men for so flimsy an offence. Achilles is supposed to have made a short trip to nearby island of Lesbos to be purified before he could fight again. When he did, he found a new enemy. Here we go. Memnon, king of the Ethiopians, came to Troy's aid late in the war, perhaps as Roman-era sources have it, bringing a large contingent of soldiers with him. If so, they were not cheap, to judge from one Anatolian ruler under siege, who paid up to 7 times the normal wage to hire mercenaries. Although Memnon does not appear in the Iliad, he is remembered in the Odyssey as a great hero. Among other feats, Memnon killed Nestor's son, Antilochus, before being killed by Achilles in turn. In Homer, Memnon is son of the legendary Tithonus and the goddess Dawn. Other sources claim a marriage tie between Memnon's family and Priam's. Memnon is too obscure a character for us to be sure that he existed, but it is worth speculating that he might have been black. Memnon came from Ethiopia, a place thought of by the Greeks in various and sometimes vague ways. The term could refer to modern Ethiopia, to any land south of Egypt, especially Sudan, to any land with dark-skinned inhabitants, or to the east, that is, the land of the morning. But one thing is clear. To the Greeks, Ethiopians had skin burned by the sun. So, to a Greek, an Ethiopian might have been black. In the late Bronze Age, Nubia, which is roughly today's northern Sudan, was conquered and annexed by Egypt. Nubian mercenaries fought in the pharaoh's army, and sons of Nubian princes were brought northward to be Egyptianized. along with the sons of Canaanite princes. Some Nubians rose to high positions in Egypt. Nubian nobles began depicting themselves as Egyptians in their tombs and sometimes assumed Egyptian names. Egypt was no stranger to the politics of western Anatolia. Pharaoh Amenhotep III had sought an alliance with the kingdom of Arzawa in western Anatolia by marrying an Arzawan royal princess. More recently, Ramses II corresponded with the king of Mira, a successor state of Arzawa. But in spite of Memnon's support for Troy, the Greek army led by Achilles routed the Trojans, who streamed back to the city, and Achilles was on the verge of forcing his way into Troy when he was struck down by Paris. Oh no. Achilles bros. The surviving bits of the epic cycle do not specify how Paris killed Achilles, but the presence of Apollo, who was lending divine support, points to archery. And I suppose as well, when one thinks back to the Iliad and remembers how Paris was pretty much humiliated in battle against Menelaus, just completely battered and bruised to the point that he was whisked away by Apollo in safety, or more likely his strap of the helmet broke and he ran. It does seem to point to an archer, I suppose. He doesn't seem like a warrior capable of killing Achilles in hand-to-hand combat. The heel was supposed to be the only place where Achilles was vulnerable. Another tradition has him shot in the ankle. If either of these stories were true, and since Achilles died right away, it would point to a poison-tipped arrow. An ordinary arrow that penetrated the ankle or heel should not have been instantly fatal. It might have led to a mortal infection, but then Achilles should have lingered for several days before succumbing. According to the Aethiopus, Achilles was shot at Troy's Scaeon Gate. The gate was a potentially weak point in the walls, so the attack was usually pressed hard there. Troy's architects compensated by channeling the enemy into a narrow space at the gate, where they could be attacked from above by defenders on the battlements, or in a tower. All of the surviving gates of Troy have designs of deadly sophistication, so the challenge facing Achilles is clear, even if the identification of the Scaeon Gate is not. The Trojan gatekeepers had opened the double doors to let the men back in, which was dangerous when Achilles and his men hot on their heels. Priam had coached Troy's gatekeeper, on the day of Hector's last battle, to close the doors in the nick of time, so that Achilles could not follow the fleeing Trojans back into town. On this latest occasion, Achilles managed to break in, just as the king had feared. Flung open to let the men stream back to safety, the gates were not closed until it was too late. Achilles had penetrated the city's defences. But not for long. Paris was waiting, and with the help of the god Apollo or Iari, he killed Achilles, just as Hector had foretold with his dying breath. Achilles must have taken up a position on the walls. At an elevation of 25 feet or more, there were few reference points to judge the distance accurately, which was critical because arrows shot from a compound bow followed an arc trajectory in a flight. The ground was also packed with soldiers, so Paris pulled off an extraordinarily lucky shot. Or, more likely, a battalion of archers fired down upon men and hit the general known as Achilles. And there's an image here. I forgot to take a photo, so I apologize. But it shows the walls and this sort of very tight alleyway that soldiers would have been forced into, and then it shows how it sharply turns. So like even if you were trying to bring some sort of battering ram to the gate, it would have been very difficult to get the battering ram through. A battle now raged over Achilles' corpse. As the Aethiopus reports, Ajax eventually saved the body and brought it back to the Greek camp, while Odysseus played the leading role in holding back the enemy. According to the Odyssey, the mourning for Achilles lasted 17 days. The Aetiopus brings in divine mourners and funeral games. And actually, in a similar way, I believe Achilles holds funeral games for Patroclus when he is being mourned. And the Little Iliad mentions a deadly contest over Achilles' arms, which had been saved along with his body. As with Hector, the revisionists were not slow to emerge. If Achilles had been so glorious, then why did the gods give him such an ugly, almost random death? 2 years after the end of the war, the ghost of Achilles confessed to Odysseus that he, Achilles, had made the wrong choice by opting for an early but glorious death instead of a long, dull life. But Odysseus protested, "Isn't Achilles honored as a king in Hades?" The ghost replied, "Talk not of ruling in this glorious doom. Talk not of ruling in this dolorous gloom, nor think vain words can ease my doom. Rather I choose laboriously to bear a weight of woes and breathe the vital air, a slave to some poor hind that toils for bread, than reign the sceptred monarch of the dead." Reality was rapidly rejecting the heroic ideal. Nothing was sacred, not even Achilles' arms, at least if the epic tradition is to be trusted. These arms were supposed to go to the Greeks' best remaining warrior, but it would take a contest to choose him. Ajax and Odysseus were the two main characters. Ajax was all muscle. Odysseus fought with his wits. The poets agreed that the decision was entrusted to the Trojans, surely a way of avoiding civil war among the Greeks. Homer claims that the children of the Trojans made the choice, while the Little Iliad offers a delicious, if perhaps incredible, scheme. Nestor proposed that the Greeks chose the winner by sending eavesdroppers to the walls of Troy. There they could overhear the enemy discussing the courage and manliness of the Greek heroes. The spies were dispatched, and they did indeed hear a conversation, but not by Trojan warriors. The speakers were unmarried girls. The first girl sang the praises of Ajax because he had saved. Excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water. I can feel my throat. I can hear my voice breaking. The first girl sang the praises of Ajax because he had saved Achilles' body, which was more than could be said of Odysseus. The second girl overruled her, arguing that even a woman could drag a corpse to safety, but only a man would have the courage to stand and guard the rear, as Odysseus had. This response was so clever that the poets saw it as a work of Athena. Indeed, epic sees divine handiwork in the whole affair. The Bronze Age liked to believe that prowess wins battles, but seasoned warriors knew that cunning trumps brute force. The best way to state this unpleasant truth was to bring in the gods. According to the Little Iliad, Athena willed the outcome. The Trojans' girls' verdict was reported to the Greeks, and Odysseus was declared the winner. Ajax, the original sore loser, went completely mad. Eventually he committed suicide, but not before destroying the cattle of the Greeks. Killing the animals was no small thing, since the cattle represented all the effort that had gone into many raids, usually led by Achilles, and they represented wealth to bring home, sacrifice to the gods, and foods for the troops. The Little Iliad says that Ajax so angered the king, quote, the king, and then Agamemnon, with a question mark afterwards, that he was denied the usual funeral pyre, and consigned instead to a funerary urn or coffin. Among the Greeks, unlike the Romans, suicide was not considered to be an honourable end. As for Ajax's burial, cremation was not the norm for Bronze Age Greek kings in Greece, but it was for Hittite royalty, and it was obviously an option at Troy. In a cemetery of the 1300s BC at the Trojan harbour, excavators found both cremation burials, that is, the bones and teeth left after cremation, and simple interments, that is, the skeletons left from the burial of unburned bodies. Some of these included Greek artifacts. The Romans considered suicide honorable. Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about what the view was, but I'm pretty certain that there's quite a few examples of various Romans committing suicide wherever the situation were, usually after some sort of disgrace. I guess maybe it was in some sort of way similar uh, to seppuku of the samurai. I wanted so bad to say Sudoku. um, but yeah, I guess it was sort of a way of I could only imagine it being in some way sort of like one one last act to own up to one's faults. Sudoku. Oh, hello, Cry. How are you, Cry, BB? I really thought you were gonna say Sudoku. Yeah, yeah. I didn't know if the little giggle came true, but it was definitely on my mind. Good morning, Cry. I hope you're having a I hope you have a good day, I should say. Get a nice breakfast. Just Kwai. Kwai. um it's Monday for you, isn't it? Oh no. Oh no. But yeah, I suppose it might just be a way for someone who defames themselves or whatever to have one last action of kind of acknowledging it. Prepping for work, so I'm just listening. Well, thank you for joining us. Welcome in, welcome in. I hope you enjoy the reading. Oh, yeah, I know. The start of the work week. It's never fun. We can get through it though. We've got it's so over right now, but in a few days we'll be so back. We'll be so back. We'll be so back that we've had never been so back before. Neither side had achieved its objectives in the pitched battles that followed the deaths of Hector and Achilles. But it would not be true to say that these battles accomplished nothing. In fact, they were without a doubt the most important confrontations of the war, because they were nearly the last. They cleared the decks for one last attempt at an indirect, low-intensity strategy. Yeah, we be back. Not bad. From the strategic point of view, the story of the Trojan girls, Ajax's suicide, and Odysseus's triumph sets the stage for a new phase of war. Odysseus was the apostle of unconventional warfare. His moment had finally come. Earlier, Agamemnon had shown good sense by listening to Nestor when it came to the toughest decisions. Now, he listened to Odysseus. Odysseus's first act was to lay an ambush for Helenus, Priam's seer son. Once caught, the seer told the Greeks what he considered to be the secret to success. Bring Philoctetes and his bow, which had once belonged to Heracles, and Troy would fall. He was a Thessalian warrior who had sailed with the Greeks from Aulis, but never reached Troy. He had been bitten by a snake on the Aegean island, either on Lemnos according to Homer, or Tenedos according to the Cypria, and the venom had left him with a disgusting wound. As a result, the Greeks abandoned him on the island. Now Odysseus sent Diomedes on a mission to bring Philoctetes. The physician Machaon was able to heal him. Why he was successful this time but not earlier is unclear, but war is often a spur for technology, including the technology of healing, and a process of trial and error on all too many patients might have taught the physician a new herbal recipe or two. I would not want to be the poor guy who's like, You're told this guy will help fix you, and then he's like, I don't know if this works, but we'll see. I have, to quote the TF2 medic, I have no idea, and then he just does something. God, that was a terrible German. That was a terrible German voice, or what, medic voice, I should say. I have no idea. With the bow of Heracles, Philoctetes avenged Achilles by killing Paris. The triumphant Greeks took the body, and Menelaus wasted no time in showing his anger by treating the corpse with complete contempt. But the Trojans fought back and recovered what was left of Paris. He was given a decent burial. Trojan custom required that his widow cut short the time spent wearing mournful black. And shortly afterward, Helen married his brother Deiphobus. This levirate marriage was common ancient Near Eastern practice, found in Ugarit and among the Hittites as well as in the Hebrew Bible, but it was not practiced in Iron Age Greece, which points to the poet's knowledge of non-Greek Moors. In levirate marriage, a brother is required to marry the widow of his deceased brother. The custom is a reminder that ancient marriage was less about romance than about cementing family alliances and securing male protectors for women. In Helen's case, her third marriage was either forced on her by the Trojans, or was a sign that she had no desire to return home to face Menelaus, or both. And Helen was still an exceptionally beautiful woman. 10 years later, in the Odyssey, she could still be described as looking like, quote, like Artemis with her golden arrows. The generals continued to pay more attention to Ares than to Aphrodite. Both sides were eager for new allies. Homer and the epic cycle agree that both parties turned to a new generation of warriors, the sons of the men who had started the conflict. That would have been possible if the Trojan War had really lasted 10 years, but since it was a much shorter conflict, this detail would have to be ascribed to myth. In any case, the epic tradition says that Odysseus went to the island of Skyros, where he found Achilles' son, Neoptolemus. Having handed over his father's armor, Odysseus convinced the young man to come to Troy to fight in his father's cause. And this was actually the, I believe, the son he supposedly had with the daughter of the king, the princess, of the island of Skyros when he was disguised as a woman. I believe forced to disguise as a woman in order to prevent his death in the Trojan War, but he was found out by Odysseus. Odysseus concocted a very, very intelligent little plan. He arrived there attempting to, I think he was just giving gifts to the king and attempting to find Achilles. But he had his friends pretend that a raid was occurring, and Achilles reached for the weapon out of instinct, and thus the ploy was revealed. Meanwhile, Priam secured the son of Telephus of Mysia, Eurypylus, as well as the troops under his command. This brought public relations as well as practical benefit, because, like Philoctetes, Eurypylus had a connection to Heracles, who was his paternal grandfather. Priam is also said to have given Eurypylus' mother an exceptionally large gift to win her permission. Like Neoptolemus, Eurypylus was evidently a very young man, or he would not have required his mother's consent. Such reinforcements came at a very heavy price, since Priam could hardly have been in a mood for largesse at this point in the war, while Odysseus could not have relished giving up the armor that he had competed so hard for, but the stakes were too high to hesitate. Hydrate, by the way. Once I get redeems, everyone can make me drown. Yeah, I definitely needed it there. I could feel my voice breaking a little. I'll take one little more sip. Eurypylus came to Troy and deployed his men on the battlefield, where, naturally, he is said to have fought with distinction, but he was soon to fall to Neoptolemus's spear. Odysseus was on the verge of a propaganda coup. He sneaked into Troy on what turned out to be the first of two secret missions. The Odyssey reports, I have to head to bed, I'm afraid. Hope I don't miss the end of the book. Great stream again. Thank you. Thank you so much, Laughslot, for joining us. Actually, if you want to stay for literally a minute, you can reach the end of the chapter. We only have well, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Or no, you know what? Go to bed. There's only like 2 pages left, but you have work in the morning. Okay. Drown. I will. Drown one day. by my fans. Damn. I just didn't want to be like, no, stay. Because I know you have work in the morning, and I don't want to keep you up. But I will attempt to get through it quickly. The Odyssey reports that Odysseus took great pains to camouflage himself, not only exchanging his armor for rags, but changing his appearance by striking his face with a whip or a stick until it swelled up. Nobody recognized him in Troy except Helen. Years later, telling the story back in Sparta, she claimed to have helped Odysseus with no less than a bath, a rub-down, and a fresh set of clothes. But she badgered him until he revealed his strategy. As usual, Helen wanted something in return for her attention. Helen also alleges that, in part thanks to her help, Odysseus killed many Trojans before slipping back out of town. But what was he doing in Troy? Possibly scouting out the target for his second mission. Some sources say Diomedes went along too. Their object was the Trojans' holiest of holies, the Palladium. In classical Athens, armed Athena was known as Pallas Athena. Roman-era sources usually describe the Palladium as a wooden statuette of the goddess Athena in arms. Whether the Trojans worshipped Athena is unclear, but the mother goddess was venerated everywhere in Anatolia, so an image of the female divinity might well indeed have held a central place in the Trojan pantheon. Stealing the Palladium was a coup that surely gave a lift to the Greeks while devastating Trojan morale. In classical times, Greek gods and goddesses commonly had larger-than-life statues, but in late Bronze Age Anatolia and Greece, figurines were a smaller way of representing a deity. The wealthy Hittite capitals had monumental sculptures of the gods, but figurines made of wood and plated with precious metals were more common. Or perhaps the Palladium was just a simple pillar, or a stele, such as those outside Troy's city's gates. Like the sacred medicine bundles carried in animal skins by certain Native American peoples, the Palladium was considered to contain a power beyond its size. Stealing the enemy's god could be very successful psychological warfare, but for some ancient peoples, it was even more. The Hittites, and many centuries later the Romans, believed that they could actually bring a particular god over to their side. The Greeks had tried everything, to no avail. Many of them may have felt frustrated as the Hittite commanders who, in spite of every effort, despaired of having to leave an enemy town unscathed. But rather than despair, Odysseus sought a war-winning wonder weapon, to use a modern term of art. Heracles' bow and Achilles' armor were miraculous objects that led to the deaths of Paris and Eurypylus. It was thought that the theft of the Palladium would weaken Troy, that is, if the thieves had been successful. The sack of Ilium says that Odysseus did not seize the real Palladium, but rather a fake set up long before to trick thieves. That would have been a good story for Priam to put out to steady the Trojans' morale. The walls of Troy stood firm, but were the Trojans still as committed to defending them? Achilles and Ajax were dead, but Odysseus had gone from strength to strength, with Philoctetes and Neoptolemus now at his side. Meanwhile, Eurypylus, Memnon, and Penthesilea had all come and gone. Hector and Paris were dead. Priam had demeaned himself before Achilles. Henellus had been captured by the enemy and had given up state secrets, and Helen was treating with the enemy. It was time for the Trojans to pray that Boreas would blow the Greek ships back home. And that is the end of that chapter, leading us on to chapter 11, the Night of the Horse. So I think now you can happily go to sleep. Sir laughs a lot. How much more of the book do we have? About 20 pages. So I think I might... no, I'm going to miss the Night of the Horse. No. I think that is heartbreaking. I think we're going to leave it there, because that was 2 chapters, and I think 2 chapters is good. Yeah, because that then leaves us the Night of the Horse, which is the last chapter, technically, and then the conclusion. But yeah, thank you all for joining me on this stream. It was very fun. We're actually just coming up to the 2-hour mark, so I think we made some pretty good time. Those of you who are currently listening, if you so would like to, it would be very much appreciated if you could follow me. And also follow me on Twitter, so you can keep up to date when I'm streaming, and any other random things I put out. I need to set up my, like those commands and stuff that do things. But what I will do very quickly is just post my own Twitter in chat, and if you so wish, you can go follow it. But yeah, I suppose thank you all for joining me. I wonder, let's see if we can go raid anyone. If anyone is on at the moment. Let me see what some people are doing. Oh, end stream. No, it's okay. It's okay. We'll raid someone. But thank you for joining us, Cry. I hope you have a nice and quick first work day. That it goes nice and quick, and you can relax soon. Can't wait to hear the rest. I think I'll probably continue the story later, tomorrow, so we can finish off the book tomorrow. Is anyone really on at the moment? There's some people who claim to be doing ASMR but are not doing ASMR, in fact. Adonis? Okay, that's a bit way too lewd for me to raid into. No, yeah, it's just a little bit too, like, there was a warning and I was like, that's just a typical ASMR warning. I don't mind there being like ASMR warnings for like, oh, I do ear licking or whatever, but this was a little bit more than I'd be immediately comfortable in putting in. I think we should raid Simi. Yeah, Simi's on. I think that sounds good. Mommy Simi. Thank you, Bunkum, for attending and for the first time chat as well. It was very much appreciated, and thank you everyone. And again, thank you to oh god, what was Mono Magic No, mana song. For some reason, I was like, I blanked completely. But mana song writing, for the raid, very much appreciated. That probably isn't very good to forget who raided you. But mana song, I got confused because I was thinking of Momomo as well. Momi Simi, but thank you guys. We'll raid into them now. Uh, but yeah, it was very enjoyable. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Slán Gafoil, Gorev Mahagut. And be nice. I guess you guys can make the raid like Rua raid or something. Yeah, Rua raid sounds good. Atsu.